So, the perennial war on Christmas. People talk about Afghanistan and Iraq, but you don't know the horror of war until you've looked into the eyes of a dying elf impaled on a candy cane. But on a serious note, and I don't know if he coined the term or not, but this quote unquote war on Christmas thing has been around since back when Bill O'Reilly was still the top dog over at Fox News. And I've always found it absurd. I think I remember a few instances, in fairness, that were maybe worthy of debate, like schools, banning or avoiding the word Christmas because they didn't want to seem like they had a Christian bias, things like that. But this general fear mongering idea that secular types and big corporations are trying to erase Christmas, or at least the use of the word Christmas, and that's up to good Christian folks to fight for it lest it disappear, I think it's basically asinine and frankly manipulative. I mean, do you really think people like Bill O'Reilly, Tucker Carlson, or Trump really think Christmas is in peril of disappearing? And in the case of Trump, I don't even know if he's even actually a conservative. I think he's more of an opportunist. But in fairness to Bill O'Reilly and certain conservative pundits, I think they may honestly, on some level, see a trend of growing secularization that bothers them. But I think it's also about hyping things up and generating outrage for ratings. And it's funny, this whole thing about Christmas or the word Christmas disappearing or secular types having an aversion to Christmas or the word Christmas. I'm secular for the sake of simplicity. You can call me an atheist, although technically, or more specifically, I guess I would say I'm an agnostic atheist, which I think it's safe to say many atheists are. And I love Christmas. I love celebrating Christmas. I love Christmas music. If someone says Merry Christmas to me, I smile and say it back. And oddly, I don't really have any atheist friends in quote unquote real life. And by that, I mean people who openly identify as atheist. And I have plenty of online atheist friends who I consider real friends. By real life, I mean out and about in the physical, world or whatever. But yeah, I don't really have any offline, openly atheistic friends. And part of that might be due to the fact, and this is, a subject for a whole nother episode, which I may have already done in the past, but the way atheist is still kind of a dirty word. I think maybe it stops people from wanting to associate themselves with a label. And part of it may also be an ignorance of the fact that there can also be an overlap between agnosticism and atheism. Um, but my real life friends are largely secular, people who don't identify with or practice any organized religion, and who are either apolitical or left leaning. And so, even though they don't go in for organized religion, they may still have airy fairy ideas about spirits or quote unquote energy, or cling to some vague notion of some kind of higher power. So, maybe what polls sometimes refer to as nuns, not NUN, but NONE, people who aren't religious but aren't necessarily atheists either. And it's disheartening, but I found that even among these otherwise secular, tolerant, and open minded types, some who I consider my friends, and this is what I was just touching on, if you openly say you're an atheist at a party or whatever, they get this sour look on their face like they just smelled a fart. A lot of toilet humor tonight. Very out of character for me. But sadly, for some reason, the word atheist has, unfairly become very demonized and loaded. I think part of it is it's just natural to have some anxiety in the face of one's own mortality, and no one wants to think that when we or the people we love die, it's just lights out. People get a sense of comfort from the idea that there may be something more, that death isn't necessarily the end, that there's perhaps some benign force out there looking out for us. So they hear the word atheist and they meet it almost with revulsion, which is a shame because I think most atheists are principled people. In fact, it may be the case that they're atheists because they are principled and want to know what's actually true instead of just settling for some comforting fairy tale. I like to think that's the case with me. But yeah, I can literally count on one hand how many self-proclaimed atheists I've met out and about in the real world. Twice at parties I just happened to bump into or have a brief exchange with a stranger who happened to be an atheist. I I remember one time it was actually pretty annoying. I was sitting on a back porch at a party drinking, and this stranger is also there, and the subject of atheism had been broached somehow. Before you know it, he's lecturing me about atheism, talking to me about Dawkins and Hitchens as if I'd never heard of them, and I can't even get a word in edgewise to tell him that I host an atheist podcast. And then the other time, it was just this kind of down to earth, blue collar, working class guy. I don't know if he openly identified as an atheist, to be honest, but this guy who just happened to be skeptical of, God and religion, etc. And then I did have this female acquaintance I met through other friends. We were probably close enough to be considered friends. We hung out at a number of parties and get togethers. She was, I guess you would say, ethnically Jewish, but was an outspoken atheist. I remember one time at a party, she was arguing with this other guy in the friend group. He was trying to put forward his own airy-fairy ideas about spirituality, and she looks over at me and says, "You're the only other atheist here. Aren't you going to jump in or say something?" It was kind of funny. I think she went on to become a teacher or a professor, but I haven't seen her in years now. She had a falling out with her best friend, who was also a member of the friend group, and just kind of disappeared. Not Nancy Grace missing girl disappeared, but went on, with her life. I think last I heard she was in Vermont. That's not borderline doxing, is it? I don't think so. But anyway, the reason I went off on that long-winded tangent is to get around to making the point that most of my friends are secular, at least in the sense that they don't embrace organized religion. Most of them aren't practicing Christians. And yet, like myself, they love Christmas, throw Christmas parties, we greet each other saying Merry Christmas. There's actually a Jewish couple in that friend group, and they're not observant at all that I know of. It's funny, the husband is Russian Jewish, I believe, and he's well over 6 feet and a real kind of rough around the edges, blue collar kind of guy, runs his own roofing business. And the wife is of Ashkenazi descent. She's a nurse. I don't want to divulge, too much about them. But prior to COVID, they used to throw Christmas parties, which they referred to as Christmas parties, complete with a tree and a secret Santa gift exchange. And they have little kids now, and I think the tree and the presents have become a thing for the kids too. And so even though Christ is right in the name, Christ Mass, I think for many people it's just, it kind of functions as a festive midwinter celebration, a time to get together with friends and family and exchange gifts. And I remember several years ago, I think a number of high-profile atheists, including Richard Dawkins, posted pictures of themselves with their quote-unquote Christmas trees. So there is this kind of secular, celebratory aspect to it that's kind of accessible to anyone. And that's not to take anything away from religious people. I think it's up to the individual to decide how much Christ they want in their Christmas, But I remember there was this Christmas documentary I watched a long time ago, and there was a historian they interviewed for the show that made a great point that's always stuck with me. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, that people who suggest that we need to put the Christ back in Christmas make the mistake of assuming that it was ever completely about Christ in the first place. And they went into how in the Middle Ages there were almost two Christmases, you could say. There was the sober Christmas of church observance, etc. And then there was the raucous Christmas of the people, a kind of wild, drunken, carnivalesque celebration that spilled out onto the streets and to our modern eyes, might look like something more akin to Mardi Gras or Halloween than Christmas. And of course, there's the Nordic pagan influence of Yule, etc. And if you go back into antiquity, there were a number of popular cults that were imported into the Greco-Roman world, including that of the solar deity Mithras. It was supposedly thought that Mithras was born on the 25th of December, and the church had a habit or custom of, instead of banning pagan customs or holidays or traditions, of assimilating and Christianizing them. And so that's one theory of how Christ's birthday came to be observed on December 25th. And I was actually just rewatching that documentary I mentioned. I believe it was a History Channel documentary entitled Christmas Unwrapped, or something like that. And renowned religious historian Elaine Pagels is in it, and she cites the Mithras thing as the reason, Christ's birthday is observed or celebrated on the 25th. But one thing I've learned about history is that often the deeper you dig, the more uncertain you become, because it seems like there's always these alternative or contesting theories and sources, etc. But I think the Mithras December 25th explanation is widely accepted, and I think it's known as the quote-unquote history of religions hypothesis, but there's also the calculation hypothesis, which suggests that the December 25th date may have been the result of calculations done by the early church, possibly counting 9 months forward from an earlier Christian celebration held on the 25th of March. It gets pretty convoluted and confused, but in general, solstice or midwinter celebrations were nothing new. One example is the ancient Roman holiday Saturnalia, which took place in mid-December and may have influenced Christmas to some degree as well. The point being, once again, that claiming we need to make Christmas about Christ again is to erroneously suggest that it was ever a wholly or entirely Christian holiday in the first place. If you really want to make people's heads explode, tell them about how in the 17th century the Puritans actually banned Christmas because they found it too frivolous, etc. In a reversal of the modern status quo, shops stayed open on Christmas and churches were closed. So it took me forever to get here, but let's play a clip of Mike Huckabee sucking up to Donald Trump as they discuss the war on Christmas and how Trump supposedly made it safe to say Merry Christmas again. And apologies ahead of time if the clip sounds a bit choppy. I yanked it from a TYT segment, and that's, how it was edited.
America had gone through a long period where people quit saying Merry Christmas. It was all happy holidays. You deliberately changed that. And openly said, Merry Christmas, we're going to say it again.
In fact, it was part of my campaign, Mike. The country had started with this woke, I guess, a little bit before that.
Yeah.
And it was embarrassing for stores to say Merry Christmas. You'd see these big chains. They want your money, but they don't want to say Merry Christmas. And they'd use reds and they'd use whites and snow, but they wouldn't say Christmas. And when I started campaigning, this was in 2015, when I started campaigning, I said, you're going to say Merry Christmas again. And now people are saying it, what I was doing. And so I would say it all the time during that period, that we want them to say Merry Christmas. Don't shop at stores that don't say Merry Christmas. And I'll tell you, we brought it back very quickly.
You really did.
Very inspirational music in the background there. And my favorite part is right at the end there, where Mike Huckabee's like, yeah, you really did. Ironically, I think that Trump may actually believe his own claim that he made it safe to say Merry Christmas again, because facts don't really seem to matter to him. The narrative that flatters his ego and is most expedient is the narrative he embraces or goes with. But does Mike Huckabee really believe that there was a time when people couldn't say Merry Christmas, or they stopped and Trump made it safe to utter the phrase again? What alternate universe are they living in? Once again, despite being a non-believer, I absolutely love Christmas, so this doesn't bother me, but every year, usually somewhere between the end of Halloween and the approach of Thanksgiving, every supermarket I enter starts, piping Christmas music through the store speakers. They have seasonal items and end caps chock full of Christmas candy, and I mean packaging that clearly says Christmas. I've still been trying to avoid animal products, and I know Little Debbie's aren't made of meat, but like milk or whatever. But I still notice my perennial favorites like Little Debbie's quote-unquote Christmas tree brownies, Little Debbie's quote-unquote Christmas tree cakes, Brock's Christmas nougat. It's nougat, right? Why'd that sound weird to me? Greeting cards and wrapping paper that clearly say Merry Christmas, little ceramic nativity scenes, etc., etc. When I'm at the checkout, sometimes they say Merry Christmas and I say it right back. Other times they say Happy Holidays. Who cares, If they say Happy Holidays, I assume it's probably because the phrase Happy Holidays encompasses several major holidays that are clustered together. Thanksgiving, Christmas, and New Year's. Another reason a person might opt to say Happy Holidays is that they might not know whether or not the person they're talking to is of another faith, and Happy Holidays also covers things like Hanukkah and Ramadan, etc., etc. And I think I already covered this on the show in the past, but the phrase Happy Holidays has literally been in use in the United States for over a century, and I believe the similar expression, Season's Greetings, has been around since the 1920s and has even been featured on White House Christmas cards, including that of Dwight D. Eisenhower. So at the end of the day, much ado about nothing, and Trump made it safe to say something that people were already free to say and never stopped saying in the first place. Well done. Merry Christmas.